Welcome to another wonderful Susanna Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susanna Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Accused Bride. Chapter 1. With tears streaming down her cheeks, Martha Pruitt hurried down the wooden sidewalk toward the train station. "I hate him," she muttered to herself, "I hate him so much." With her face lowered, she hid her reddened cheeks from people she passed, not wishing to explain to near strangers why she wept in public. If someone asked, she'd have to answer how her stepfather, Charles Mills, had lost his temper with her mother, again. As she would never lie, Martha would feel humiliated to explain how he threw his breakfast plate against the wall, smashing it and scattering slabs of bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes everywhere. Naturally, kind people would offer sympathy and pity, neither of which Martha could stomach. Few in town knew of Charles's nasty temper and penchant for breaking things. Martha's mother, Nancy, insisted upon keeping that secret in the family. She didn't want the neighbors talking, nor could she walk through town with her head up should rumors about the violence within her home fly through the streets. Martha feared for the safety of both of them, and terror filled her heart when she considered what might happen if Charles went too far. Discreetly wiping her face with her gloved hands, Martha sniffed back her tears. She took a deep, cleansing breath, trying to force calm into her fractured nerves. The train station was but a block away, but she refused to walk in there weeping. Fortunately, the early winter day held a brisk wind, and she could blame her red cheeks on the cold. Lifting her face, she walked on as though nothing in the world was wrong. The wooden floor creaked as she walked into the warmth of the train station. The master, Mr. Bellum, glanced up. He smiled as he recognized her. "Miss Pruitt," he said, coming around the counter to take her by her hands. "Come, child, sit here by the stove and warm yourself. Look at you, your face is pinched with the cold." Martha smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Bellum. You are most kind." Sitting where he indicated, she stripped off her gloves and held her hands close to the fire. "It is chilly outside today. I imagine you're here to collect your mail," he said, striding to a small pile of envelopes on the counter. "I do believe I have something here for you." "I'd hoped a letter came," she said. "I heard the train stopped by yesterday." It did indeed. Mr. Bellum sorted through the pile, then selected an envelope. "Here you are, miss. I'll go to the back so you may read it in privacy." He vanished, leaving Martha to read the name on the return address. Mr. Bart Wilson, Sweetwater, Arkansas. Excitement flooded her as she opened the envelope and read. "My dear Martha, I hope this finds you well. Our winter has begun, and our cattle have been sorted for winter pastures. Not much left to do until spring except mend broken items, chop wood, and stay warm. Hunting is good. I look forward to your letters, and perhaps one day soon you will accept my proposal of marriage. Though we have yet to meet, I feel I know you as a kind, sweet, and honest woman. I would care for you as my wife, and the mother of my children. Your loving and future husband, Bart." Smiling to herself, Martha put the letter back into its envelope and tucked it up her sleeve. This was her third letter she'd received from him since she answered the advertisement for a mail-order bride. In desperation, knowing she had to leave her mother's home, she wrote to the agency, and thus found Bart. He owned a cattle ranch, penned his letters with a neat and tidy hand, and promised her a good life should she accept his marriage proposal. Mr. Bellum returned from the back room. "I hope your letter brought you good news, Miss Pruitt." "It did indeed, Mr. Bellum. Thank you for permitting me your hospitality." "Anytime, dear child." Feeling happier and less anxious, Martha left the station and headed through town, walking back toward the small modest house she shared with her mother and stepfather. In the 2 years since her father died from pneumonia, she lived with Charles and his violent temper, which seemed to grow worse and worse with every passing week. Though he'd never struck either her or her mother, she'd never felt safe with him in the house. She had begged her mother not to remarry so soon after her father's death, but her mother wouldn't listen. So now, finding her own husband and leaving seemed to be Martha's only option. Without the need to hide her face, she walked with her head up and saw the town's sheriff striding toward her. She'd encountered him a few times, and thought him a very nice and fair man. A widower with 2 sons, Sheriff Townsend stood tall with broad shoulders and a lean, rugged face. The star on his jacket gleamed under the chilly sunlight, catching her eye. He stopped and tipped his hat to her. "Miss Pruitt, what a pleasure." "Good morning, Sheriff," she said. "How are you this fine day?" "Very well, ma'am, thank you for asking." "Is everything all right at your home?" Martha froze. "What do you mean?" "Earlier today, I happened to be passing by when I thought I heard raised voices," he said, his sharp gaze resting on her. "So, I'm merely asking if everything is well." "Of course," she said, torn between telling him the truth and an outright lie by saying that she dropped a plate. He gave her a suspicious stare, and for a horrid moment, she thought he was about to accuse her of something. His eyes still narrowed, he finally said, "Good. Glad to hear it." She expected him to step aside and permit her to walk on, but he continued to watch her. "I'm just doing my job." Flustered, Martha nodded. "Of course." He touched his finger to the brim of his hat. "Have a good day, ma'am." As he walked past her, Martha quelled the urge to run after him and tell him everything. She wanted to tell him about Charles's violent moods, his harsh criticism of both herself and her mother, and her fears that he would only get worse and turn that violence upon them rather than dishes. But there was something about the way the sheriff had looked at her. Instinctively, she suspected that he wouldn't believe her. Besides, her mother wanted to keep the truth private. Troubled, Martha walked on. Chapter 2. Can't you do anything right? Martha, shivering in her bedroom, listened as Charles yelled, berating her mother for adding too much wood to the fire in the hearth. The night was cold, and Nancy said she wanted her husband to be warm as he sat in his armchair beside the blaze. Instead, Charles flew into a rage over her waste of wood. "I'm the one who has to cut it, you fool," he bellowed. "All you and your useless daughter do is make more work for me." "But, Charles." "Shut up, woman. Never interrupt me." "You never interrupt me, got it?" "Yes, Charles." "Yes, Charles," he mimicked, his voice a high falsetto. "I should never have married you. You're too stupid to get anything right. Why, you can't even cook me breakfast properly." Martha heard the crash of wood tumbling across the floor, and she guessed Charles had kicked the wood bucket over. Usually, Charles calmed down after one of his violent fits, but this time his rage seemed to climb higher. More clatter followed on the heels of the first, and then the sounds continued in the kitchen. "Charles, stop that," her mother said. "I apologized. Now, please stop breaking things. We don't have the money to replace these plates. Are you daring to tell me what to do?" His voice had risen to a near scream. "No, of course not, but... How dare you?" Martha heard a heavy thudding noise, a crash, and then a terrible, ominous silence. More frightened than ever, she threw the door to her room open and raced to the kitchen. Gasping, she slid to a stop, her eyes bulging as she stared in horror. Charles stood over her mother's body, a heavy iron skillet in his hand. Nancy lay on her side, blood oozing into a thick puddle beside her head. She didn't move. "What have you done?" Martha screamed, falling to her knees beside her mother. Clearly, Nancy had died instantly, for her blue eyes stared blankly into nothing, her forehead pushed inward. Sobbing, incoherent, Martha tried to wake her, shaking her mother's limp shoulder, despite the knowledge that Nancy would never move again. "You did this," Charles hissed. "What?" "You hated your mother." Charles now spoke calmly, setting the skillet down. "That's what I'll tell the sheriff. You killed her in a fit of rage." "No, you killed her. You killed my mother." Breaking into great sobs, Martha wept, covering her face with her hands, her heart torn into pieces. "Mother. I'm so sorry. I wasn't strong enough to help you. Mother, mother, mother. Wake up. The courts and the law will never take a woman's word over a man's," Charles said, his voice still eerily calm. "All I have to do is say you did it, and you'll be hanged." Her eyes streaming tears, half blinded, Martha gazed up at him. "What are you saying?" "Run, Martha," he said, his beady eyes filled with evil, his smile a sneer. "Run, and never come back. You stay here, I'll see you hang." "You can't." "Shall I go get the sheriff now?" Panicked and terrified, Martha got to her feet and backed away from him. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. "Then stay here and die." Running, Martha bolted to her room. Her mind frenzied with grief, she threw open a drawer in her wooden chest and grabbed the coins and bills that represented the whole of her savings from selling eggs and performing needlework for women of the town. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she stuffed the money into her small cloth handbag and drew the string tight. Unable to think properly, she ran out of her room, past a sneering Charles, and out the door. She never thought to grab her warm wool cloak as she dashed out into the night. Nor did she think of Bart's letters, still in her room. Chapter 3. Huddled beside the train station, half hidden by some bushes, Martha wept icy tears. Though the night's chill hadn't dropped to killing levels, she spent a very cold and lonely night, rubbing her arms in an attempt to stay warm. The building and the shrubbery gave her some protection from the night breeze, even so she shivered uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. She knew the train was due to arrive shortly after dawn, and she prayed she had enough money to buy a ticket to Arkansas. Her only hope lay in Bart. He'd expressed his desire to marry her and offered her a loving home in Sweetwater. If she could just get to him, she could be safe. Safe from Charles and his malice, safe from the sheriff, safe from her terrors. She dared not think of her mother, lying dead on the floor of her kitchen, murdered by her own husband. Should she dwell on that image, Martha would begin to cry and never stop. Dawn broke over the horizon, flaring in rose pink and purple, birds chirping and singing as they greeted the new day. Stiff and cold to her marrow, Martha stood up and slowly walked to the front of the station. Hungry and miserable, she tried to brush the worst of the dirt and dead leaves from her dress and to comb the tangles from her red gold hair. She sat on the bench watching the sun rise, feeling a tiny bit of warmth return to her bones. It wasn't Mr. Bellum who arrived to open the station, but his assistant, a young man she'd never seen before. He eyed her curiously as he opened the station door. "Can I help you, miss?" Martha stood slowly. "I need to buy a train ticket." "Of course." Allowing her inside, he built a fire in the stove. Martha breathed easier as the flame's growing heat warmed her up. The young man opened a book on the counter and asked, "Where to, miss?" "Sweetwater, Arkansas." "You're in luck, ma'am," he said, smiling. "The train runs right through there on its way south." He turned and pointed to a sign behind him. "Here are the fares." In terror that she didn't have enough, Martha counted out the necessary money, and felt a new chill when she came up a few pennies short. "I'm so sorry," she began, feeling her face blush red. "Close enough," the assistant said cheerfully. "I'm sure the railroad company won't miss a cent or two." "Thank you," she said, almost crying at his kindness. "And may I wait in here?" "Of course, ma'am. Sit and be warm. The train should be arriving soon." Trying to hide her desperation, Martha watched the foot and horse traffic pass by outside, waiting for the sheriff to barge in with loud accusations and a hangman's rope. The station assistant paid her little mind and went about his chores as the sun rose higher in the sky. She heard the train long before it arrived, its whistle blowing as it announced its arrival. Afraid to step outside and wait for it in clear view of the townspeople, Martha remained where she was, shivering despite the heat of the stove. She planned a quick getaway, a plunge through the people gathering on the platform and straight onto the train. She'd give her ticket to the conductor, and pray that neither Charles or the sheriff would think to look for her there. Once the train pulled out of the station, she'd be free. Her plan worked. The hissing train, belching steam, pulled up beside the platform. With her ticket clutched in her damp palm, Martha edged her way through the crowd that had gathered to greet disembarking passengers or the mail. No one tried to stop her, and no one asked questions she could not answer. The conductor accepted her ticket with a nod and a tip of his hat, and she settled into a seat furthest from the crowd. Slumping down beneath the window, Martha huddled against the wall, hoping the few passengers getting onto the train didn't pay her any attention. As no one took seats near her, she gradually began to relax. For the duration of the train standing still, nearly an hour, she feigned sleep as a means to explain her body's position. At long last, the train's whistle blew. Chugging, starting slowly at first, it gradually gained speed and pulled away from the station. Martha dared not pull the window down to watch her home and everything she'd ever known vanish into the distance. Fear, anxiety, depression, and a heartbreaking sorrow filled her as she gazed forward, into what she hoped was a love-filled future. Chapter 4. The train would take almost 3 full days to arrive in Sweetwater. All around her, passengers ate either the food they brought with them or they bought small items from the train's porters. Martha had no more money and had brought no food with her. Hunger gnawed at her, grinding into her vitals. She tried not to stare at the other passengers as they ate and laughed and talked. She remained huddled into her seat, watching the world pass by. "Miss?" Martha glanced around. A little girl with pink ribbons in her blonde pigtails stood beside her seat. "Are you hungry? You ain't got no food." "I am, a bit." Martha tried to smile as though nothing at all was wrong. "Here." The little girl held out a chunk of dark bread, almost half a loaf, to her. "Mama says it's good to give to people who don't got anything." Martha accepted it, her saliva glands already moistening in anticipation. "Thank you, dear child. Thank you very much." Smiling, the girl gave her a tiny curtsy, then dashed back to her parents. Martha forced herself to eat only half of the bread, saving the rest for the next day. The bread helped both her energy and her emotions, and she managed to sleep that night, lulled by the rocking of the train. She ate the rest of the bread the next morning, but the train wouldn't arrive into Sweetwater until noon the following day. Still, Martha felt encouraged by the fact that not all people were like Charles. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The train pulled into the station in Sweetwater, and Martha rose from her seat, weak and shaky from exhaustion and hunger. She smiled as the little girl, hand in hand with her mother, waggled her fingers in farewell as they walked down the aisle to get off the train, too. The air was not quite as cold as back home, but cold enough to make Martha shiver. The sky overhead was gray with clouds, and she wondered if it might snow there. Stepping out of the crowd at the station platform, she cast about, wondering how to find Bart and his ranch. An old man, dressed like a farmer, trundled by in a small wagon drawn by 2 mules. "Excuse me," she called, waving. Taking his pipe from his lips, he reined in and gazed down at her. "Ma'am?" "Excuse me, I apologize," she said, rubbing her arms. "Do you know Bart Wilson? At the Rocking W Ranch?" "Why, I don't know him personal, like," the man said, removing the pipe from his mouth. "But I've had the occasion to speak with him once or twice." "Are you possibly passing by his ranch?" she asked, desperate and on the verge of begging. "I am." "As you're asking, I expect you're in need of a lift out there?" "Yes, please. If you would be so kind." "In fact, I am so kind." He hopped down from the high seat, and helped her up to sit beside him. "It's too cold for a young miss with no outerwear to be out and about. There's an old blanket there. Wrap yourself in it." Grateful, Martha drew the blanket, smelling of wet dogs, around her shoulders as the old man hopped nimbly up. He clucked to the mules and guided them down the street toward the western edge of town. As they traveled, she expected the usual spate of questions. Why had she come? What did she want with Bart and his ranch? Why was she alone with no appropriate garments and no luggage? Yet, he did not. Her own inquisitiveness roused, she asked, "You aren't the curious sort, then?" He took the pipe from his mouth. "Nope. I ain't wondering about no one's business but my own." "You're a rare man." "Nope. Not at all. Most folks should best be mindin' their own business. God don't like gossips and all that mess." Despite the mule's decent pace, it still took them almost 2 hours to arrive at the road that led to the Rocking W Ranch. The old man reined in, hollering, "Whoa," at the mules, then jumped nimbly down and helped her from the tall seat. "That there will take you to the ranch, miss," he said, climbing back up. "Good luck to ya. And you. God bless and thank you." With a snap of his reins, the old man set his mules to trotting again, raising a thin veil of dust from hooves and wheels. Martha gazed around, finding no sign that she had, in truth, arrived at Bart's ranch. For all she knew, the old man dropped her off on a road that led to nowhere. With a sigh and a prayer, she walked, shivering under the blast of cold. The old man had taken his stinky blanket with him. For over an hour she walked, frozen to her bones, too cold to even shiver any longer. Her hunger had long since vanished under the power of the winter breeze, but her weakness had not. She often stumbled over small stones, her shoes tripping her at odd moments. The sun overhead drifted into the west and began its descent. Martha knew that if she didn't reach shelter, she wouldn't survive the night. The notion that she faced death failed to trouble her, however. If God were merciful, she'd be with her parents in heaven. She found she rather liked that idea. Before darkness fell utterly and the cold sent her into a fatal sleep, she walked toward buildings and lights and the scent of wood smoke. Someone played a fiddle in the building to her right, the sound of laughing voices rising into the night air. Straight ahead was a house with smoke curling from the chimney into the dusk, and it was toward there that she dragged her feet. Climbing the steps, she rapped on the door with her knuckles. The door opened, spilling out warmth, light, and the face and shoulders of a youngish man with bright brown hair and whiskey-colored eyes. He gazed at her in shock, his jaw slack. "Ma'am? Are you?" Martha stopped, then tried again. "Are you Bart Wilson?" "Yes, I am." "Are you in trouble, miss?" "I am Martha Pruitt." His jaw dropped fully, and his eyes widened. "Oh, dear Lord," he gasped. I didn't expect." "Oh, please come in, Martha. Are you all right?" Staggering inside his small house, Martha made her way to the blazing fire on the hearth. "I'm so sorry," she tried to say, to explain. "I've nowhere else to go. I came to marry you, if you'll have me." "Oh, dear, you're completely frozen," he said, his tone now brisk. "Come, sit here by the fire. It's too cold out there." Letting him guide her to a rocking chair next to the hearth, Martha sank down gratefully. "I'm so sorry to arrive like this." "When was the last time you ate, Martha?" he asked, crouching beside her chair. "You look pale." "I had a little bread on the train." "That's a 3-day journey." "Sit and rest, and I'll heat some broth." The heat of the room entered her limbs, and they tingled painfully. Her breathing calmed, and she dared think she might survive. She heard sounds telling her that Bart was in the kitchen, and she smelled something good. But her eyes didn't want to remain open. They grew heavier with each passing minute. She roused when Bart offered her a hot cup of meaty broth. She drank it gratefully, feeling not just its heat pour through her, but the nourishment she sorely needed. Handing her a chunk of bread and some cheese, he watched as she devoured every morsel. "Tonight," he said, sitting beside her, his light brown eyes gazing into hers earnestly, "you'll sleep in my bed. It's warm and topped with heavy blankets. I'll bunk right here by the fire." "No, please," she began, "I'll sleep here." "Don't argue," he said, helping her to stand. "You need it more than I. I'll do my best to nurse you back to health." Despite her protests, Bart guided her to the bedroom where he pulled back the blankets on the wide bed and urged her into it. Tenderly, he tucked her in, covering her to her neck. Martha fell asleep before he blew out the lamp and left the room. Chapter 5. For the next 2 days, Bart refused to let Martha out of bed except to use the outhouse and wash herself. He brought her food on a tray: cold beef, fried chicken, fried potatoes, crisp bacon, boiled eggs, a soup made of vegetables and beef, and a hot venison stew. Despite her protests that all she needed was a little food and a good night's sleep, Bart catered to her with all the devotion of a young groom to his sick bride. Under his ministrations, Martha slept, ate and regained much of her previous youthful strength. He asked only the most basic of questions: what happened to bring her to his door in her obvious dire condition? While unwilling to lie to him, Martha answered only with the basics: her mother died suddenly, and she had to leave with no money and much haste. She knew Bart wanted to pry more information from her, but he was too much of a gentleman to poke at what was obviously a sore subject. Her respect and feelings for him rose, and Martha knew she'd found not just a home, but a loving husband to care for her. When at last he allowed her out of bed, they sat in front of the hearth, holding hands, and smiling at one another. Bart told her of how he started the big ranch with nothing save a horse and 2 cows when he was 15, while she told him of how she lost her father, and how her mother had then married a cruel man. She wept over her mother as Bart held her close against his chest, his loving words of comfort pouring into her ears. Letting him fill in the details with his imagination, Martha prayed and hoped that was all she needed to tell him. She'd found in him the perfect man, handsome, with a sweet smile, and someone she could depend upon and love. On those long, cold winter nights, they shared their dreams for the future, of their children, of their long lives together. "Let's be married on Sunday," Bart said, leaving his chair and kneeling in front of her. "The gossip will start right soon if we don't make this official. I don't want your name sullied. So, what do you say, Martha?" Suppressing a sigh of relief, Martha touched his cheek. "Really? Sunday? How will I find someone to stand for me by then?" "I'll bet Preacher Morgan's wife will stand for you." "Then yes, Bart Wilson. I accept your proposal. And I'll care for you the rest of my days, Martha Pruitt." Thus, they were married, and Martha lay with her new husband in their bed as the icy wind raged outside. Snuggling deeper into the blankets, Martha fell asleep with Bart's strong arms around her, listening to his heart beating in his chest, and dreaming of a kind future. Chapter 6. Sheriff Bill Jenkins read the telegraph once, then twice, scratching his head under his hat. "Now, that's downright peculiar." He glanced up at Willie Travers, the station master who had written the message down for him. "This here says a young woman killed her mother with a frying pan and fled here. That's she's to marry young Bart Wilson." Willie frowned, his thick brows lowering over his spectacles. "Bart Wilson would nary consent to marry a killer, Bill. Unless he doesn't know. Even so, a woman murderer? That don't make much sense to me. I expect even a woman might pitch a fit and lash out. Even so, something about this don't set right. It stinks, if ya ask me." Willie sniffed the air. "Why, I took a bath just yesterday, Bill. Clean shirt, too." "I ain't stinkin', Dot." Bill eyed him in annoyance. "I meant the situation, you old cuss. I reckon I best get on out to the Rocking W and have a talk with our newest resident. 'Cept I can't get out there until later. I have to ride out and check on my pa. Where is that old geezer? Went huntin', and no one's heard from him in days. Ah, he's probably up in that cabin of his, tanning a bear hide. Well, that's where I plan to start lookin', Dot." Striding out into the brisk early winter breeze, Bill mounted his horse and trotted down the street, heading west. Thornton Reeves, a tall lanky farmer who'd come to Sweetwater from Ireland, opened the door to the station, making the bell overhead chime. Willie peered at him over his spectacles. "That you, Thorny?" Thornton scowled. "I do hate that bloody nickname, ye old coot." Willie cackled. "But it do suit you. What can I do for ya? Have any letters arrived for me?" "Nah, not yet, son. Still hoping for a bride to answer you?" "Aye. Had a fine lass write me. Hoping to hear from her again soon. Peering at him, Willie rubbed his nose. Listen. Bart Wilson got himself a new bride. Does he now? Mail order from the agency? Indeed. But the sheriff got word she's wanted for murder. Of her own mother. Ah, that poor sod. He's a likable one, he is. Will the sheriff be arresting her? In time, he says. Meanwhile, his old man went missing again. Thornton laughed. Albert keeps Bill Jenkins hopping. Now, you'll be letting me know when I get me a letter? Sure will. As Thornton left the station and strode toward his horse, the notion came to him to make a stop at the Rocking W on his way home. Chapter 7. Martha hummed under her breath as she kneaded bread into loaves, planning fried chicken and dumplings for supper. Bart worked in the barn with one of his hands, shoeing horses. In the week since she and Bart had married, only the specter of her mother's death marred her happiness. She grieved yet, often weeping in Bart's arms. Despite knowing that Charles might possibly never face justice for killing her mother, the wound in Martha's heart slowly closed. She missed her mother more than she ever thought possible, and every day that passed, she longed to share her growing happiness with her. She hated not telling Bart the entire truth regarding Charles and her mother's death. By his cautious questions, Martha knew Bart suspected there was more than a simple explanation as to how she arrived on his ranch, exhausted and half-starved. Again and again, she evaded directly answering him. True, she was growing to trust him. She hoped Bart could never think her capable of murder. Yet, somehow, when the truth hovered on her lips, the vision of Charles's menacing face and threat of her being hanged stopped her. She could only hope that he'd given some other explanation for her mother's death. She began to feel safe there on the ranch. For even if Charles made good on his threat, she was no longer Martha Pruitt. She was Martha Wilson now. Besides, who would think to look for her in Sweetwater, Arkansas? Gazing out the kitchen window, Martha caught sight of a young man with carrot-red hair and a matching red coat ride into the yard on a horse. Bart walked out of the barn to greet him, and the two shook hands. Must be a neighboring rancher, she thought, as the two seemed quite friendly and familiar with one another. She continued kneading the dough, adding more flour, her arms white to the elbow. She was thinking it would be nice to meet some of the folks here. Martha watched as Bart and the stranger spoke at length, then shook hands again. The red-headed man turned his horse and trotted back down the road. Bart, in long hurried strides, walked toward the house. A strange feeling of unease wormed its way into Martha's heart. She heard the front door open and swing sharply closed again. Martha? Bart called. In the kitchen. The unease burst into full-blown fear when Bart erupted into the kitchen, his expression dark, thunderous. Have you been lying to me? He demanded. What? I'd never. I've just been told you're wanted for murder, Martha. Murder. Trembling, feeling sick with fear and dread, she stumbled to a chair and sank into it. Oh, dear God, Bart. Did you kill your own mother? No, she cried. I'd never harm her. Never. But she is dead. Just what happened? What aren't you telling me? Since you came here, I suspected you'd been hiding something. What is it? Bart, listen, please. His face was contorted and she couldn't tell if it was anger or hurt. But somehow, she felt as if she were looking into Charles's eyes and his raging face. Tell me. Crying, Martha sobbed into her apron, choking out the words. It was my stepfather who killed her. Bart sank into the other chair. Go on. He has a terrible temper, she said through her tears. He's always throwing and breaking things. I was so scared he'd hurt my mother or me. I told her over and over that we should leave, get away from him, but she refused. Sometimes, Martha gasped and pain sliced through her heart, she laughed at me for worrying. She couldn't see it. She loved him. Wiping her tears, Martha gazed into his eyes, desperately needing him to believe her. I wrote to the bride agency, she went on, swallowing hard. I had to get out of that house. You and me, we began writing one another. Then one night, Charles got angry with Mother. Again. He hit her with the iron skillet. So how is it you're being blamed? He said he'd tell the sheriff that I did it. That no one would believe me. He told me to run, or he'd see me hang. So, I ran. To you. Bart shunted his gaze away from her, staring at the floor. She tried to read his expression, to know what he was thinking. Did he believe her? Her fists gripped her apron hard, her knuckles showing white. Her heart beat in fast, hard strokes, nausea swirled sickeningly in her stomach. If he didn't believe her, would she have to run again? Where would she go? How will she live? I don't know what to think, Bart muttered. You believe me, don't you? He gazed into her eyes finally. I want to, he said simply. It's the truth. How did they know you were here? I took only a little money, Martha said. Her mind spun and then the sickening truth pounded in her heart. I left your letters behind. He let out a groan. Don't you see, Bart? She asked, forcing herself to calm down. Charles had to explain my mother's death somehow. So, he blamed me. And because you ran away, you look guilty. She nodded, miserable. He stood up. As I said, I want to believe you. Somehow, I can't see you as a murderer. But I need time to think on this. What will you do? Think. Chapter 8. A stiff silence hung between them at supper that night. Miserable and terrified, Martha ate her food without speaking, the dumplings sticking in her throat. Bart refused to look at her, and after finishing his meal, he went into the other room. While she cleared away the dishes, Martha came to a conclusion. Bart didn't believe her and never would. She'd have to run, leave him behind, and find her way to another town. Then what? She asked herself. Beg for food and shelter, and hope someone took her in? Perhaps she could work as a seamstress or a cook. Becoming a tavern woman terrified her, selling herself for coin. Her stomach tied itself into knots when she considered that as her only option. But for many women without a husband beside them, there was no other way. Bart slept in front of the fire as she climbed into the bed alone. Sleep came hard for her, and she stared out the window at the nearly full moon riding high in the black sky. Its light lent a faint glow to the darkened room and glimmered on her tears as she wept. When would the sheriff come for her? Bart's friend had warned him that he was coming. She'd expected him that evening. She needed to get away. She'd hoped Bart would help her, but she now feared he wouldn't. Hugging his pillow to her, Martha cried herself to sleep and dreamed of a hangman's noose. The sluggish sunshine the next morning did little to cheer her spirits when Bart, once more, ate his breakfast without speaking or meeting her eyes. Pulling on his long coat and his hat, he left the house and walked to the barn. Martha watched him from the window, then sat down on the chair. Her eyes remained dry. She had no more tears in her. Gone was her bright and loving future, her marriage to a fine man, her possible children. Resting her head in her hands, she wondered if Bart would turn her over to the Sweetwater sheriff himself. Perhaps he will at least give me a horse and a head start. Afraid to stay and petrified of fleeing, Martha went about her daily chores, cleaning and cooking, jumping when she heard the slightest noise from outside. Was it the sheriff? Had he come for her? Bart didn't come in for lunch, so she ate alone, not hungry, and only picked at her food. She just decided to put lunch away, when Bart hurried into the kitchen. Martha. She only gazed at him, unable to bring up any emotion, not even fear. Her soul felt dead inside, gone to heaven ahead of her. All that remained was for her body to perish. The sheriff is riding down the road, Bart said, his tone urgent. I expect you'll turn me over to him, she replied. I'd hoped you'd believe me. I should have fled. Saved you the pain of turning your wife over to the law. No, he said, sharply. I want to hear what he has to say, but I want you to hide." "Why should I?" she asked. "You believe I'm a killer, that I killed my own mother." He ran his hands through his brown hair. "I don't know what or who to believe." "Please, Martha. Just go into the bedroom and close the door while I talk to him. Sheriff Jenkins is a very reasonable man." Shrugging, feeling numb, Martha went into the bedroom and partially closed the door. But she stood behind it, leaving it ajar, so she could listen. She heard Bart's boots on the wooden floor as he left the house. As the window in the bedroom didn't face the front, she couldn't watch as he greeted the sheriff. Still, she didn't have to wait long before he returned inside with the other man. "Yes, I was to marry a girl, Bill," Bart was saying. "She hasn't arrived yet. I telegraphed the sheriff in her hometown," said a deep, powerful voice. "Jack Townsend. He said the girl's stepfather was a mean one, and he has doubts about his story. But I do have to ask questions, Bart. You know that." "Of course," Bart replied. "But something must have gone wrong, and she got on the wrong train. Truth is, I'm worried about her. If she does show up, will you tell me? I don't want my future bride accused of a crime she didn't commit." "I don't either, son. That's why it's important I speak to her." "If her stepfather blamed her," Bart said, "perhaps she ran to another town, to another man. If she did that, then she's not our problem, right? Look, if she does come, don't be afraid to bring her to me. I'll help get to the bottom of this." "I will." Their voices receded under the sound of their boots as Bart escorted the sheriff out. She was a fool, and a selfish one at that. How could she let Charles ruin her new life with his lies? And why hadn't she fled sooner? Had she gone soft in the head? She snorted softly, disgusted with herself. What was she thinking? She should have hightailed it out of there at the first mention of this mess. Pain sliced through her heart and she bent over. She loved Bart. And now she had to leave. She had to leave. Even if Bart didn't give her away, it was only a matter of time before his ranch hands talked, or the man who had dropped her off that first day there. And the preacher. He would never lie for her. She was doomed. There was no way around it. Martha didn't wait for Bart to come back. Grabbing a blanket off the bed, she wrapped it around her. Ducking into the kitchen, she saw through the window that they were still talking. Heading back through the house, she slipped out the front door. No one saw her as she huddled under the blanket against the cold wind and began to walk. Chapter 9. Relief filled Bart as he watched Bill Jenkins ride back down the road toward town. What the other sheriff told him coincided with Martha's account, that her stepfather had a vicious temper. Of course, she didn't murder her mother. Bart could hardly believe he'd ever doubted her. Feeling as though a great weight had been lifted from him, he hurried back into the house and flung open the door. "Martha?" No answer. Sticking his head into the kitchen, he found her lunch still sitting on the table. Frowning, he checked the bedroom, wondering if she were lying down. She wasn't there, and a blanket from the bed was missing. "Oh, no," he muttered, rushing out through the main room and outside. Fear plunged into his heart like a blade. He checked the barn, the outhouse, the sheds. None of the hands had seen her. "Martha," he yelled, walking around the cluster of buildings. "Martha." "Something wrong, boss?" asked Joey, one of his hired men. "I can't find my wife," Bart said, buttoning his coat against the rising wind. "Saddle my horse." "I think it's going to snow soon," Joey said, hurrying toward the barn. "I know. I have to find her." While he waited for his horse, Bart rechecked all the places he'd checked before, but Martha seemed to have vanished. Studying the ground in front of the house, he found it too hard-packed for her to have left any tracks for him to follow. Still, he gazed toward the hills. He suspected he might know what was going on in her mind. "It was me. I did this. I didn't believe her, and now she thinks I'm going to turn her over to Bill Jenkins." Guilt flooded his heart. He had driven her away as surely as her stepfather had. He understood why she didn't tell him everything when she arrived. She hadn't known how he'd react, and when he did discover the truth, he behaved badly. He had turned his back on her when he should have offered her his shoulder and support. If anything befalls her. He didn't permit himself to finish that thought. Martha couldn't get hurt. Couldn't die. I won't let her. As Joey came around the front of the house with his horse, saddled and bridled, Bart said, I'm heading up there. I think she went into the hills yonder. But in case she didn't, I need you men to search the road. If you find her, fire off a single shot. You got it, boss. Bart swung into his saddle and kicked the gelding into a swift lope. Dark clouds gathered in the north as Bart felt the temperature drop. If he didn't find her before nightfall, she would surely die under the onslaught of the coming storm. A blanket wasn't enough to keep her warm. His stomach clenched in worry and fear, yet he still tried to think as she might. He knew she was in the house when he walked Bill out to see him off. If she left at that moment, she couldn't have walked more than a half a mile by the time he mounted his horse. The problem, he realized, was that he had no idea what direction she took. Once she reached the trees, she could turn left or right and he'd ride on past without finding her. Loping up the hill, he reined into a trot, scanning the area for any trace that Martha passed through. The terrain comprised mostly of scrub oak and thickets of pine, elm, spruce and evergreen trees. While the hills were mostly open, the higher a person climbed, the thicker the forests and thickets grew. Bart knew that if she reached them, he'd never find her. Martha, he called as he rode. Martha, answer me. It's Bart. It's all right. You're going to be all right. Rather than ride straight up, he traversed the hillside, crossing and crisscrossing the side of the hill as he rode steadily higher, always calling her name. The afternoon wore on, and his throat grew sore from shouting. His fear grew, the higher he climbed. Martha. Please answer me. Martha. Cresting a hill, he reined in, gazing back down into the valley below. Ant-like forms moved on the sinuous line that marked the road, and he knew his men hadn't found her there either. Despair filled him. Darkness would fall within hours. The storm had arrived, and snow swirled like tiny dust motes on the cold wind. He felt the promise of serious snowfall in his bones. Martha. No help for it. I have to keep looking. Nudging his horse back into a trot, Bart continued his backtracking across the hill. It was sheer chance that made him glance below him, not gaze above. A shadow moved in a thicket he'd passed by earlier, but as its growth was heavier on the downhill side than the uphill, it gave him a quick flash of gray and the glint of red gold hair within it. Martha. Galloping downhill toward her, he swung from his horse before the animal slid to a halt. Martha. She gazed at him from the folds of the blanket in the midst of the prickly bushes. In her eyes, he found no welcome, no gladness that she'd been found, only fear and resignation. Go home, Bart. No, he said, kneeling beside her. Not without you. She turned her face away, staring down into the valley just as he had done. I won't let them hang me, she said. Go away and leave me alone. You'll die out here. He wanted to reach in and take her hand, but both the shrubbery and the blanket deterred him. I know. Bart bowed his head. I am so sorry I didn't believe you, Martha, my love. I am so sorry for that, and I will bear that guilt for the rest of my life. But I do believe you. I know you didn't kill your mother. Why would you believe me now? Her voice was harsh. Because I know you. I lost sight of that for a while. He looked at her and she was so beautiful, so vulnerable, so hurt. Remorse filled him. Please, forgive me. She just stared at him, remaining silent. Both sheriffs in 2 different towns are willing to believe you, too. Both know your stepfather had more potential to kill your mother than you did. Tears filled her eyes. So, he replied, drawing in a deep breath. So, I want both of us to go back, face your stepfather, and clear your name. Martha's lips parted and she gasped. If I go back, I'll hang for certain. No, you won't hang. I won't let you. Have you ever met the sheriff there? This, Jack Townsend? Yes. What manner of man is he? Fair? Tough? Both, I suppose. Wouldn't he grant you a fair hearing? Bart asked. If you told him your side of the story? I don't know, she said slowly. He seems suspicious of me. I don't know. Maybe. Then let us try, sweetheart, Bart pleaded, fearing he could never offer her enough hope to go back home with him. If she died out these in the wilderness, so would his heart. And it would be his fault. Come back with me. We'll take the train and be there in a few days. We'll tell the sheriff your story, and see your mother's killer brought to justice. The law always takes a man's word over a woman's. The sheriff and the court will believe Charles over me. What? Where did you get that idea? Charles. No. They'll listen. And I'll be there. Sheriff Jenkins would never disbelieve you because of your gender. But we have to talk to Townsend, not Jenkins. If Townsend is any kind of decent lawman, he won't be any different. Martha bit her lower lip as she studied him. He could see her weakening, maybe even starting to believe him, if only a little. All right, she finally said. Relief flooded him. He extended his hand. Come here, sweetheart. I want to get you home and in front of the fire. This storm is only getting worse. Still wrapped in the blanket, Martha crouched down and carefully worked her way out of the shrubbery. Once she stood up, Bart could contain himself no longer. He hugged her tightly, stroking her back with his hand, feeling her shiver from the cold. Tilting back her face, he kissed her. Then he picked her up and set her in his saddle. I should let the men know they can stop searching. Pulling his gun from its holster, he fired a shot into the air. His gelding tossed his head, startled, but didn't otherwise move. Shoving his gun back in his holster, Bart swung up onto the gelding's rump, holding Martha in his arms as he nudged the horse into a walk, headed downhill. The snow swirled around them, falling in thicker waves as the unseen sun sank into the west. Darkness grew, and their breath steamed white on the icy wind. Below, lights flared in the house and the bunkhouse as Joey or one of the others lit lamps and fires in the hearths and stoves to welcome them back. Bart kissed her cheek. I'm so glad I found you. I'd be lost if I lost you. Chapter 10. Clinging desperately to Bart's hand, Martha's heart pounded as they approached the office of Sheriff Bill Jenkins. Her mouth dry, she trembled in fear despite Bart's assurances that he would not immediately drag out his noose and hang her. Nor would he, Bart said, arrest her. Thus, she tried hard to rein in her terror, despite feeling that everyone they passed on the street stared at her and pointed. Several times she turned, expecting to find sneers and accusations among the pointing fingers, yet she found people minding their own business as they walked or rode through the streets of Sweetwater. Bart opened the door to the sheriff's office and ushered her inside. Martha's heart nearly stopped in her chest. The sheriff was so big. He moved with a lithe grace as he rose from his chair, smiling down at her as he offered her his hand. A fine pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. Thank you, she replied, her voice faint. Would you care for coffee? He asked, taking her by the arm and leading her to a chair. Tea, perhaps? Coffee's fine, she murmured, anxiously seeking out Bart, who had closed the door against the icy blast of wind. As Bill Jenkins poured 3 cups of steaming coffee from the pot on the stove, Bart took the chair next to Martha, and squeezed her hand. I do apologize for my lies, Bill, he said. Finding out that Martha had been accused of killing her mother, I was stunned and didn't know what to do. I've done both you and my wife a great disservice. Bill handed out the cups, then sat behind his huge oak desk. Quite understandable, Bart, and I don't hold grudges. His eyes turned to Martha, and he folded his hands atop the desk. Please, "Ma'am, all I want is to hear your story. Tell me what happened." Martha gulped but met Bill's eyes without flinching. "My stepfather, Charles Mills, killed my mother." Bill listened intently, without interrupting, as she told of Charles's temper, his throwing and breaking things, her own fears that he'd one day take his rage out on herself or her mother. She explained how her mother refused to leave him, but that she herself needed to flee, and how she applied to the mail-order bride agency. With tears falling, she told of her mother's death that night and how Charles instilled in her a panic that if she didn't run, she'd hang. "Bart was the only one I could turn to," she said, wiping her cheeks. "He offered to marry me. I didn't tell him about what happened because I was so scared." Bill nodded. He asked her a few questions, needing her to fill in more details. Her coffee had grown cold before she drank it, and she set the cup on his desk. "Bart has told me you're going back to Ohio to clear your name," Bill said. "Is that true?" "Yes. I don't want this hanging over our future or our children's future." "Can't blame you there. If it matters at all to you, Mrs. Wilson, I believe you. My pa didn't raise any fools, and I can spot a liar a mile off." His eyes flicked to Bart, who blushed and sagged deeper into his chair. "I plan to telegraph Sheriff Jack Townsend, so he'll be expecting you." Martha shivered. "But, what if he doesn't believe me? What if he takes Charles's side? That's the risk of clearing your name, ain't it? High time you faced your accuser." "Yes. You're right, Sheriff." "Good. I'm glad you see it my way. Now, I'm told the train will be here within the hour, so I will walk you both to the station." "Are you afraid we'll run off, Sheriff?" she asked, standing. "Run off?" he asked, pausing in the act of slinging on his heavy coat. "If I was afraid you'd run away, do you think I'd let you go?" Martha laughed, feeling a bit lighter. "No, I guess not." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The 3-day train ride back to her hometown went far easier than her trip to Sweetwater. She had food, comforts, and of course, Bart. When she slept, her head rested on his shoulder. When she ate, he ate with her. She couldn't get enough of holding his hand, kissing him on the cheek, loving him. Martha blushed when she found an old woman watching the two of them, then smiled when the lady gave her an approving nod. Ohio weather wasn't any warmer than Arkansas, but this time when she stepped off the train, she wore a thick woolen cloak that fell to her ankles. The wind didn't cut through it, yet she shivered anyway upon sighting Sheriff Townsend on the platform awaiting them. Gripping Bart's hand tightly, she gathered her shattered courage and marched over to him. "Welcome home, Miss Pruitt," he said, tipping his hat. "Or is it Mrs. Wilson?" "This is my husband, Bart Wilson, from Sweetwater, Arkansas," she said. Sheriff Townsend shook hands. "Pleasure, Mr. Wilson." "Glad to meet you, Sheriff," Bart said. "Can we get in out of this wind?" "Of course. This way." Once again, Martha thought the folks on the street stared at her, pointing, accusing. But when she turned to look, folks huddled in their coats and cloaks, rushing to get out of the icy weather. Just as she herself did. None stared at her with condemning eyes. Bart smiled at her, reassuringly, as though reading her thoughts. He did his best to shelter her from the onslaught of the wintry wind as they hurried behind the sheriff. The sheriff's office was toasty warm as she entered ahead of the men. It was also occupied. Martha froze in shock. Charles sneered from the chair in front of the sheriff's desk, and an armed man with a badge on his shirt stood behind him. "Well, if it ain't my beloved daughter come home to me." He chuckled, a contorted sound, but Martha detected a nervous tremble in it. "What are you doing here?" she choked, unable to move. Bart gently pushed her forward, enabling himself and Townsend to enter behind her and close the door. He protectively stood at her side, his hand on the butt of his gun. Townsend courteously took Martha by the arm and led her toward a set of chairs near the stove. "As you can see, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," he said, gesturing toward Charles. "I've invited Mr. Mills here to join us. A nice family reunion." Martha glanced at him sharply, wondering at this new game. Still, she sat down where he indicated, gripping Bart's hand hard enough to break it. "He wants me here to witness your confession, Martha dear," Charles commented, examining his fingernails for dirt. "Please tell him, and your new besotted husband, how you murdered my beloved wife." Martha lunged upward. "You killed her. Murderer." Townsend stood, imperious, frowning. "Please sit, Mrs. Wilson. You will have your turn to speak." As Bart tugged on her hand, Martha sat back down, trembling, not with fear but with fury. The sheriff also returned to his chair and gestured toward Charles. "Mr. Mills," he said. "Please tell us how your wife died." "Certainly." Charles shot his cuffs and straightened his collar. "I loved my wife, you know. Very much. Her daughter hated her mother. Has a terrible, terrible temper." At this, Bart rose from his chair, his hand on the butt of his gun, his expression dark, furious. "Watch your mouth, mister," he gritted. "That's my wife you're maligning." Charles sighed. "See? She attracts the same kind. Like calls to like. Anyway, Martha here was jealous that her mother had found happiness with me. The night she died, Nancy, my poor, lamented wife, argued with Martha. I heard crashing, the sound of breaking crockery. Naturally, I was afraid, for Martha had threatened violence before." Sheriff Townsend made a gesture and the deputy put himself between Bart and Charles. Bart relented, his hands high in submission, and sat down. But he never stopped glaring at Charles. "Continue, Mr. Mills." "Thank you, Sheriff. As I was saying, Martha threatened violence before. Thusly, I feared for my dear Nancy's safety. But I was too late. Martha had already cracked her across the head with the frying pan. In an instant, I was made a widower." He wiped an imaginary tear from his eye, and Martha trembled with rage. If Bart hadn't held on to her hand, and if the deputy's broad form hadn't been imposed between her and her target, she'd have scratched his eyes out with her fingernails. Giving her a few minutes to calm and compose herself, Sheriff Townsend nodded to her. "Mrs. Wilson, you may offer your account." She took a deep breath and folded her hands in her lap to control herself. She remained sitting in her chair. As quickly and quietly as she could, her voice shaking, she told her version of the events that happened that night. How Charles owned the horrible temper, what he accused Nancy of doing, how his rage escalated. Her quiet words filled the silent room, accompanied only by the crackling of the fire in the stove. Martha recounted her mother's death, how Charles threatened to blame her for her mother's death, how in her fear and panic she ran away. "I'm sorry I ran, Sheriff Townsend," she said. "I know now I shouldn't have. You once told me I could come to you if there was any trouble, and yet when it came, I didn't. I should have trusted you then. Just as I trust you now." "Trust," Charles scoffed. "There's no trust where you're concerned." Before Bart rose from his chair in outrage, Townsend raised his finger. "Not another word, Mills. You had your chance to speak. Now I want to hear from someone else." "Who?" Charles snapped. "There was only me and her there." "Oh?" Townsend asked. "Nancy was there. I think we should hear from her." Martha jolted from her chair, trembling with hope. "My mother is alive?" "I'm sorry to mislead you, Mrs. Wilson," Townsend said. "No, your mother did die that night. But the dead can speak to those who are trained to listen." "Doctor?" Martha sank back to her chair. From the back of the building came a tall, balding man, a monocle over his left eye, wearing the familiar black frock coat Martha remembered. He gravely bowed to those present in the room, and only Charles shrank from him. As there was no chair available to him, he merely stood silent, waiting. "Doc Jessup, you know everyone here except Bart Wilson," Townsend said. "Mr. Wilson, this is Dr. Jessup, our town's doctor and mortician. I have asked Doc here to share his opinion on the manner of Nancy Mills' death." Dr. Jessup once again bowed. "A pleasure, Mr. Wilson. Martha, my congratulations on your marriage, and my deepest condolences upon your mother's demise. Thank you, Doctor, Martha said faintly. Now this is not a court of law, Townsend said. It is merely a fact-finding mission. Court will follow upon the closing of this meeting. Now as Doc examined the deceased, Mrs. Mills, I asked him here to answer a few questions. Is everyone all right with this? Martha nodded. Yes, Sheriff. No, Charles stood, irate, his hands in fists. I demand you arrest Martha on the charge of murder. You aren't here to demand anything, Townsend said, his voice calm. Sit. I will. Sit down. Townsend's voice cracked like a whip. Charles sat down as though his legs had collapsed, and his face grew pasty. Dr. Jessup, Townsend said, may I ask, how did Nancy Mills die? From a heavy blow to her forehead. And what was the weapon? An iron skillet, sir. How deep was her injury? Dr. Jessup adjusted his monocle. Oh, the entire front of her head had been caved in. That took a very strong arm, sir. Townsend gestured toward Martha. Could a girl have caused that kind of damage? The doctor frowned slightly. That would be difficult to say. Strength of arm varies from person to person. Very well, Townsend said, nodding. From the angle of the killing blow, say if the victim, Mrs. Mills, were standing in front of her killer, what hand held the skillet? Oh, that's much easier. The left, sir. Charles started to get up, to rise from his chair, his eyes bugging in his head. The deputy put a strong and unrelenting hand on his shoulder, keeping him securely down. Martha gaped in astonishment. I am right-handed, she gasped, examining the appendage in question. Oh, I know, Townsend said. I've been watching you. You've never used your left hand except to hold on to your husband. Mr. Mills, however, is left-handed. How extraordinary. That's not right. Charles snapped. The doctor is a fool. There's no way to tell what hand wielded anything. Oh, that's not true, Dr. Jessup said. Mrs. Mills' forehead was crushed primarily on her right side. That meant whoever swung the iron held it in his or her left hand. Simple physics. And quite irrefutable. I also have here, Townsend said, leaning back in his chair to pull a piece of paper from his pocket, more information. I've asked a few questions, Mr. Mills, since your wife died. About you. You came here from Missouri, sir? Is that right? Yes. Charles's tone sounded grudging. St. Louis to be exact, Townsend said. I telegraphed the Pinkerton Detective Agency's office in St. Louis and asked them some questions about you. Want to hear what they had to say? Of course not. I'm through with all this. I'm going home. Charles started to rise again, and this time the young deputy used both hands to shove him back into his seat. Leave that chair one more time, Townsend said grimly, and I'll tie you to it. Chapter 11. Martha watched in fascination as her stepfather's face changed from an angry red to a pale color resembling bread dough. He refused to look at her, and sat, sullen, his lips thinned, staring at the floor. The young deputy watched him like a hawk, ready to pounce should Charles make the wrong move. I have here some interesting information, Townsend continued as though there were no interruption. There was a first Mrs. Mills. Martha, your mother was the second. What? Martha stared from Charles to Townsend to Bart and back again. He was married before? You never knew this? No. Charles told my mother he'd always been single, despite being older than most men when they married. So he never told your mother about his daughter? Martha jumped to her feet. He was married and had a daughter? Where is she? Just as I asked your stepfather to sit, Townsend said, politely but firmly, I must insist you do as well. Bart tugged on her hand, and Martha sat, shooting confused glances at her unrepentant stepfather. Now, this is a civilized society, Townsend said, and we all will behave like civilized people. As I was saying, Mr. Mills here had a wife and a daughter. They died in a mysterious fire. Martha put her hands over her mouth. Oh, God, no. Somehow I think God took the day off, Townsend said dryly. Charles Mills left town before the ashes cooled enough for anyone to enter the home. The Pinkertons said the two died not from the fire, but were dead before the fire started. However, our loving husband and father was nowhere to be found. Until now. Sheriff, Dr. Jessup said, shifting his weight to his other foot. If I am no longer needed, I have rounds to make. Dear Mrs. Jones has such a terrible cough. Feel free to go, Doc, Townsend said. Thank you very much. The doctor departed the office on a blast of cold air and the swirling of snow. Townsend steepled his fingers and stared at Charles. Here's the fascinating thing, he said. The fire didn't burn their bodies by much. And the constable in charge found bruises on their throats. As though they'd been strangled before the fire was set. Thus, he asked the Pinkertons in for their opinion, and they assisted with the investigation. They sought the third member of the family, but the culprit had long since disappeared. I didn't kill them, Charles muttered. So, you admit to having a previous wife and daughter? Townsend asked. Yes, he began, then glanced around the room. No. It weren't me. Liar, Martha hissed, glaring at him. The only thing keeping her from launching herself at her stepfather was Bart's firm grip on her hand. You killed your own daughter? Your daughter? No. How old was she? Bart asked, his tone low. The daughter? Not even 5 years old. Martha screamed. This time it took both Bart and the deputy to keep Martha in her chair. Over their shoulders, Martha saw Charles cringe back in his chair, clearly afraid. Townsend stood, but his eyes were on Charles, not her. As her husband gently forced her back into her seat, Martha gasped, acquiescing, nodding that she would sit and behave herself. Bart gripped not only her hand, but kept his arm about her shoulders. The deputy stood to one side, ready to pounce either on her or Charles. But Charles merely stared at the floor, his shoulders rounded. Have you anything to say, Mr. Mills, Townsend asked, before I place you under arrest for the murders of both your wives and your young daughter? Charles didn't answer. Townsend jerked his head at the deputy, who touched Charles on the shoulder. He rose, silent, and permitted the officer to escort him into a cell. Martha's anger, never assuaged, still raged even as Charles was locked inside. He'll surely hang, Townsend remarked. The judge will be here next week, if you care to stick around to watch. No, Martha said. He's evil. An evil, evil man. I don't want to see him hang. I want nothing more to do with him. Martha, Bart said. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for your mother. She took a deep breath. And I'm sorry for my outburst, she said stiffly. Vengeance is for the Lord, not us. Not me. Townsend stood, a faint smile on his lips. I'm thinking the Lord sometimes relies on others to do his work. If you want to remain, you may stay at the hotel at the town's expense. After all, you helped catch a murderer. It's the least we can do. And as for your poor mother, well, we've got the man on that count, too. Martha finally managed to gaze at her husband. I want some of my mother's things, she said. The sale of the house, for instance. If he's a criminal and he dies, it reverts to her. The way I see it, the house is yours, Townsend said. I'm certain your former home will sell quickly, Martha. Martha stared at Charles, who had sunk onto the bare mattress in his cell. While she thought she should feel triumph or vindication, all she felt was sorrow. Because of this man, 3 lives were destroyed. Almost 4, she thought, if I hadn't found Bart. She squeezed Bart's hand and offered him a faint smile. I'd like to stay long enough to see to the house. Of course. I'll get someone to collect our bags and take them to the hotel, Bart said. Townsend stood up and offered his hand to Martha. It took a great deal of courage to come back here, ma'am, and I'm right glad you did. I hope this doesn't come as a shock, but the Pinkertons offered a reward for the capture of Charles Mills. $100. It's yours. Martha thought she'd faint. $100, she squeaked. Both Bart and Townsend laughed, and Bart hugged her. I guess that's a shock all right, Sheriff. Listen, I'd like to take her back to the hotel. It's been a long trip, in more ways than one. Of course. I'll wire the Pinkertons straight away regarding that reward. Martha leaned against Bart as they walked headlong into the biting wind, her emotions whirling. From raging sorrow to hopeful happiness, she had run the gamut, and it had exhausted her. With her husband's strong arm around her, protecting her, she wondered if it was all truly over. Her mother could rest in peace now, and Martha had the rest of her life to live. With Bart. Chapter 12. Martha stood beside her mother's grave, tears falling. Without the steady winter wind, the sunlight warmed her, feeling good on her face and neck. She hadn't wanted to come empty-handed, but there had been no flowers to lay upon it during winter. Instead, Martha had brought with her a pendant her mother loved and cherished. Opening the chain, she set it around the simple wooden cross marked with her name. I wished you could have met my husband, Mother, she said. Bart is a good man. You'd like him. She gazed around the silent graveyard. I'm so sorry to tell you, Mother. Charles hanged yesterday. I know you loved him, but he was bad, a very bad man. Sometimes when we love, we can't see the evil in people. I don't fault you. Taking a half-hearted swipe at her wet cheeks, she took a deep breath. I wished you could have been placed next to Father. But I know he's with you in heaven, even if your bodies are no longer side by side as they should be. Bart and I will be going back to Sweetwater soon, so I need to say goodbye. For now. One day, we will be together again. Pressing her fingers to her lips, she touched the marker, then turned to leave. Bart stood at the entrance of the grave site, waiting for her, granting her privacy as she communed with her dear mother. He greeted her with a hug and a kiss, then held her close. They're burying that sorry man way over there, he said. Martha turned to look. In the far corner of the cemetery, slightly outside the cemetery proper, workmen with picks and shovels dug a fresh grave. A plain coffin sat on the ground nearby. No mourners waited, no reverends stood to offer prayers. Just a hole in the ground, a pine box and a soon-to-be forgotten grave would be all that remained of Charles Mills, a murderer. I didn't want him buried anywhere near her, Martha said. I ordered a headstone carved for your mother, Bart said softly. Nancy Pruitt, not Nancy Mills. Gazing up at him, Martha said, You are the best of men. He laughed, guiding her away from the graveyard. Talk like that will go straight to my head. It's true enough. I hired a lawyer to handle the sale of your house, he went on as they walked. He believes it will sell quickly, as there are folks moving into the area. And Sheriff Townsend told me the Pinkertons are wiring the money to Sweetwater, so it will be there when we get back. When will the train arrive? The day after tomorrow. Bart stopped walking and brushed a tendril of red gold hair from her face. Are you ready to go home, back to the house? Home. Standing on the street at the edge of the town, Martha gazed around at the people walking or riding about on their errands, heading to the mercantile or the seamstress shop. It was a nice town, the place where she grew up. But it was home no longer. There was nothing left for her here. Her home was now in Arkansas, with Bart. I am, she answered, her voice soft and sweet. Home to Arkansas. I thought to wait until we arrived back in Sweetwater to tell you this. But I think now is a good time. Tell me what? Martha smiled tenderly. I suspect we're going to have a baby. Shock loosened his jaw. He tried to speak, his mouth working, but nothing came out. Martha laughed, hugging him and loving the surprise she sprang on him. He finally managed to get his jumbled thoughts in order and bent to give her a swift kiss. Are you sure? He asked. I mean. No, I'm not completely sure. It's too early to be certain, but my heart tells me I am. They say a woman always knows, Bart said. Then he whooped with joy and picked her up, swinging her around, unmindful of the spectacle they made. We are going to have a young un. Come on, we have to share this with Jack Townsend. He's truly become our friend. Hand in hand, they walked down the wooden sidewalk. I only wish my mother knew, Martha said. It would make her so happy. Bart looked down at her tenderly and caressed her cheek with the back of his hand. I think she does know, Martha, my love. And you are right. She is very happy about it. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susanna Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susanna Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susanna Calloway Western romance.